Thank you so much. So listen, we have like the typical thing is one question, 3 answers, and we're done because by that time we run out. So we're going to do this a little differently, which is a few questions, and maybe we can even sort them, topically, and then you will just have to remember a few questions and respond to it rather than each question. So I just want to be sure that everyone has a chance to speak. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, my question is, I guess for all of you, but just really thinking about Reed stuff, is what does this mean for professional development? How much of this can be trained, or how much of this is, there's just some people who can do this, and I don't know if that's, I do know in the education world there's a little bit of both, and then in terms of what kind of training you would do.
Okay, good. Let's see whether we have a couple of questions on this topic, on training. Yes, go ahead, please. Someone? No, it's coming.
Very related to that is...
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm Noelle Hurd. So related to that, my question is just around like screening and selection as well. So I think it's inherent in your question maybe, but what would be recommendations related to maybe like screening and selecting leaders, and then the training piece as well?
I see. Okay. One more. And then we'll have one set of questions answered. Yes, go ahead.
Administrator of after-school programs for Fairfax County, which is a couple hours north of here. We're fortunate we have after-school programs in 26 middle schools, which range from a free and reduced price lunch of less than 1% to 75%. I wanted to talk about the friendship piece a little bit, because when we ask our kids, and we get about 20,000 kids a week coming to after-school programming, what's the number one reason they come? The number one reason is that there are fun, interesting things to do there. The second most important reason they come is their friends are there. And when we ask them, 80% say they would ask their friends to come. And I think that's the real challenge, because the school day is packed. The kids have no time to decompress during a school day, elementary, middle, or high school these days. In an urban environment, it's probably unsafe to meet with your friends after school in the street. In a suburban environment, they're sort of too far away. Middle school kids especially, it's either walking distance or biking distance. So after school is really the environment where those friendships form. And I think your point is well made. My question is, how can we begin to expand that to a wider range and get that message across about the forming of relationships and friends? It is sort of taking care of the gang issue in Fairfax County. It is taking care of the youth development issue, and I think that's an important message to carry across about the impact of after school.
Good. I think what we should do is stay with the first 2 questions and then expand on your comments and questions about kind of how can one use this to think about engaging young people and also to make the comment, to bring it into the field. But how about the first 2 questions? So it's about training, screening, coaching probably as well.
Yeah, I think right away 50 years of research on education, training and education, there's still a lot of controversy about how to train teachers, and a lot of people saying we're doing it wrong. And education is partly, I think, shifting more to a problem-based approach, getting people in the field sooner. But yeah, what I would say is, okay, training needs to be about problems, not just about studying them in the classroom, but getting out in the field and having chances to reflect. When I've presented to youth practitioners about this work and lay out some dilemmas and we talk about them, they say, oh my God, you're actually talking about our lives. And what they say is, we never have time to do this, and it'll be people from the same organization. I'm finally giving them permission or some time to do that. It seems like that needs to be more central across, and it could be not just kind of the worst, it could be proactive as well as the reactive situations I'm talking about. I know some textbooks on youth development I've seen where you look through it and there's no discussion of problems. It's just totally amazing. It's like, okay, here's the best practice, you do this, and kids will develop. And we have our lists of best practices and we believe in those as researchers. Okay, that's cool, but how do you actually implement these on top of 4 or 5 other things going on? So
let's hear from the others too.
Yep. Okay.
I think that's a great question. As I listen to Reed, I'm thinking about agencies or places that do train leaders. I think my short response would be, I think it's possible to train around these areas. I think also it would also require thinking about a model for how we train and reward leaders who are spending time for reflecting on these issues. I think somebody said earlier that we need to professionalize the field. Oftentimes you apply for a job and you get thrown in and you're just, you're there. I've spent time in some local Boys and Girls Club with students at the undergrad level, and we reflect on across multiple semesters that there is no time. Youth leaders have been in the job 20 years, and there's never a day in a week, across the year that they stop and reflect. So I think part of the answer is thinking about how do we increase the professionalism, how do agencies and broader foundations provide space for leaders to reflect on the things that don't go so well so they can inform the best practices.
Stanley, do you want to?
Sure, quick. What I'd say is that I do think being a good youth worker is an inspired person who has some very special characteristics. That said, the more structure and context we can provide for folks training, if you will, the better able they will be able, it'll stretch who can be successful in that. I get concerned because I think the training that people get as social workers and as youth workers don't generally address the basic needs that they have. So we were talking today in our small group about the empowerment program for athletes and so forth. The question, how do you build group? What do you do? I mean, I think sociologists tend to be able to interpret what folks are doing in the group, but how do you actually impact that? So at Teen Empowerment, we have, and Gil talked about this, moving beyond Icebreakers, which is a shameless plug for my book. But what this does, it has 150 pages talking about what's the purpose of this. How do you use this tool? How do you make that work? That enables people to study a process by which they can become effective in groups. It's not easy to do it. There's a lot to it. When you talk about behavior management, the kind of scenarios that you talk, in Teen Empowerment, we have a contract. If that scenario took place in Teen Empowerment, there would be a set of things that people would not have to make up. They would know. I mean, the key thing about rule enforcement is predictability. You're riding down the street, you get a ticket for going over the speed limit, but they changed the speed limit yesterday, and that's what you're outraged. If you actually knew what the limit was. So there's a whole set of, I think, principles that can be developed which would broaden significantly the number of people who would be successful in this role. And then finally, I mean, when you talk about professionalism, if you're paying people $8 an hour for 10 hours a week to work in a Boys and Girls Club, I don't know what your expectations are in terms of what you're going to get for that. So, the professionalism is key, and understanding what's really at stake here is important.
Can I do one sentence on question 2?
Of course.
I'm a terrible job interviewer, but the best job interviews are ones where you give people a couple situations and say, how would you deal with this really difficult situation? And there may not be a right answer, but you can tell which wheels are working.
So that gets into the screening, kind of your way of thinking also about, job interviews. Okay, so let's just have one more round and see whether there's, and by the way, it is 5 o'clock, so anyone who has to leave should feel like you can answer your phones, etc., and not feel trapped. But for those of you who want to stay for a few more minutes, and literally 5 minutes is the max, what are some other questions? Yes, Charles.
I was just curious to hear the answer to his question about friendship. As how do we talk to people about the importance of friendship and its role in? I think you said diffusing gang activity, and there are a couple of
Relationships with peer pressure, with boy-girl relationships, with empowerment issues and gang issues. That relationship piece is, and building friendship is just critical.
Yeah.
And how do you get that message across?
Okay, so let me just see. So Charles, thank you. I was hoping we would get to this topic. So is there another question that really focuses right now on the kids and why they're there and their motivation and how to build on what they're looking for? Okay, if not, that's okay too, because then this is certainly a big question.
So I guess, I don't know, I thought I talked about that quite a bit, and I have to say, I mean, I think that, you engage young people as partners in addressing those issues. I think you create spaces where you intentionally address the needs for people to get to know each other. So what happens on the first day of a program? Do you know? How, when people come in the room, is there a way for them to introduce themselves? Is there a way for them to break down, and as Nickki was talking about, they came in, they didn't know each other, they were nervous. They went through a process of, we call them icebreakers. We call them moving beyond icebreakers because there's a lot of ways that those things can be used to deepen relationships. At Teen Empowerment, first day of every group begins with, among other things, concentric circles. Probably people have done it. 2 circles, inside circle, outside circle. You have 2 minutes to talk about a particular question. Where were you born and what are your first memories? Next question, you move over 1. You're going to talk to half of that group. By the end of that process, and you kind of move through people's lives, and so your first grade teacher or, a whole series of different questions depending on the group. By the end of that, people really know each other, and all kinds of barriers are broken down by that. And in terms of the gang violence and all that, getting young people to speak about those issues because they actually know a lot about it. And almost none of them are pathological. That is, there's no need for them to be, a psychological need for them to be criminal. When they're given the opportunity to use their power in positive ways, many, many of them will take it. That said, there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to recognize that they actually are valuable in that picture. If we go to just the ministers or just the police and just the social workers, we are kind of pushing a rope.
Right, okay, great, thank you. Nickki?
Sure. Really intriguing question. My mind goes to an answer at multiple levels. So one is, so the first idea is getting the message out there. So I go to then the role of policymakers, the role of researchers, the role of program administrators as you structure programs, right? As you think about how you're going to provide training for your leaders, to think about passing on that knowledge that we have, emerging as it is about the importance of providing a space and opportunity for young people to build those bonds and friendships, right? So that's one piece of it. Stanley's comment made me think of another piece, which is, as a practitioner, how do you support and scaffold the development of friendships? And I do think it has to be an intentional process. The bits I've gotten over the years from the youth is that leaders almost serve as role models. So again, I think the keeping is so funny. So we present these slices of the engagement model, but it really is this puzzle that has a lot of pieces. And so this idea of talking to your young people about the importance of treating each other kindly goes a long way. One person said, I think the leader, just talked about the importance of bringing in new people and how that's helpful. And I think piggyback that with, then you're inviting these people to your home, your space. Let's figure out how to have them feel welcome. right? So I think it's a multi-layered piece of it, but it is about really continuing to advance the work about, as I mentioned when I was speaking, also as people who are actively thinking about it as researchers. What are some of the nuances in terms of what facilitates the development of the bonds, right? Across, you have a really diverse program. What are some of the things that you have to think about? So that's my short answer.
And Reed, last but not least.
I have nothing to add, but Mark's question includes something about bridging across many different school districts, and I'm not sure if we got to that.
I think that's a great question. What I would suggest is I'm going to volunteer the three of you to stay up here for a few minutes and maybe for you and others to come up, if that's okay, to kind of continue that discussion. If you want to say one sentence, that's okay, but not more.
I defer to Stanley on that.
Okay, well, he had a chance. So I think.
The $24 million.
Okay, so why don't we kind of shift this? I just want to summarize for one moment here and really think about the following, that I think the three of you gave us a lot to think about. And what I think you gave us to think about is, for me at least, I'll just tell you how I listen to this. The first thing is Reed's notion that it's about dilemmas, that actually expertise is about a better way, a more sophisticated way, a more encompassing way to deal with dilemmas. They aren't really a simple right or wrong answers. That's why I think the introduction of, is this yes or no, really doesn't quite work, because you have to know the context. And I think that teaching and training around dilemmas is really essential. The second thing, I think, is that, and I kind of put words in your mouth, Nickki, is that engagement, learning through engagement is essential. So that you need coaching. You don't just train people. It really has, if I think about like my training in research or my training as a clinical psychologist, how many hours went into that to be put into this famous zone of proximal development and make your mistakes and slowly be growing into a role of maturity and expertise. We are, just because they're youth workers and they're paid little, doesn't make this less complicated than what a psychotherapist has to do, a social worker has to do, or a teacher has to do. And so when we're talking about professional development, we are really talking about coaching and supervision and support over long periods of time. And I'll get to the dilemma in 1 second. And then I think the last thing that I take from your work is that and also from your work, that some of the best teachers are the kids. So it's not just the expertise of the experts, but it's actually the co-construction of the work together in the field that has common purpose, that makes two parties, the youth workers and the students, learn from each other and with each other. So I think I'm really happy whoever kind of put this together, and I think it was Nancy, really there was a real logic to this, because I was trying to kind of figure this out. So I want to leave you with the dilemma